Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this public update. Today we have Lisa Winwood, the Chief Constable of North Yorkshire, Andrew Brady from the Fire and Rescue Service, and Richard Flinton as Chair of the Local Resilience Forum, which covers both North and North Yorkshire. Richard, I'm conscious that you have another meeting to go to, so do you want to give your update? We also have Mike Walker, who's the chair of the Strategic Coordination Group, and Mike can follow you, if that's all right, Richard, with any additional comments. So, Richard, do you want to start?
Yes, will do. Thanks, Julia. The LRF is managing the same strategic risks that it has been over recent weeks. So that's around the overall capacity of the NHS and its ability to stand up and deal with the situation that we have, the situation in care homes, PPE as an issue, something that's becoming less of an issue around managing mortality as we come over the peak and hopefully carry on descending down the other side. And generally coordinating the activities of partners as we try and implement this phase of relaxing the lockdown restrictions and manage that in a way that protects life, but also enables people to move about more freely than they've previously done. And clearly the weekend that we've just been through has been our first real experience of that, and I'm sure Lisa and Mike and other policing colleagues will have their own view of how that's gone. The messaging that we as an LRF have been keen to put across around this is to avoid busy places. North Yorkshire is a very large county, including York, and there are plenty of options for people to take advantage of that relaxation without the need to go to busy places, and our guidance is very much to avoid those, the obvious tourist hotspots. In terms of the general progress of the virus around the county, we have noticed that we've hit the peak in terms of numbers of beds being occupied in hospital as a pretty good guide as to what's happening across the piece. It's come down, but it's come down much more slowly than it went up in the first place. And the rate of decrease is less than it was in the early days of coming down the other side of the peak. So it is decreasing. That is good news, but it is still very evident that there are live infections taking place in the City of York and in North Yorkshire, and as a group of emergency services, but also as the public at large, this is a very present and real risk that we need to manage. And it's interesting to look at some of the data around the different parts of North Yorkshire, and we can see that the virus is operating at different levels around the county. So in the more rural areas, such as Rydale, for example, there's been a lower incidence of the virus, but it is tailing off less quickly than other places, for example, Harrogate, where there's been an overall higher incidence, and Hambleton as well, but it is starting to drop much more quickly than in some of the other district areas. Selby being another example where it is questionable whether we've actually reached the peak yet in Selby. There's a degree of plateauing taking place when we look at the data there of numbers of confirmed cases. So a variable picture as you would expect across the county area, but one that very much says that the virus is present with us, and whilst we can start enjoying some lifting of the restrictions, we need to be ever vigilant and practice all of the good hygiene messages: wash our hands, keep a safe distance, etc., etc.
Thank you, Richard. I've just got, we've had some questions from the public. We're starting to get quite a few questions, so we've themed them. And in that way, we hope that that will answer members of the public's questions. And you have very helpfully there just answered one in particular around the sort of distribution of the virus in the county. But one of the things that I think residents will be quite interested in is the government has said that the risk of transmission outdoors is very low. Do you have any more information around the risk outdoors? Because there are some communities that are really worried about this, and I think it might be helpful for them to have a little bit more information around the actual risks.
I don't have some direct evidence from North Yorkshire, Julia, but in terms of the messages that Public Health England are putting out, some of the more later research shows that it, whilst it can be transmitted in an airborne way, that appears to be less the mode of infection, and it appears to be more of touching hands, touching surfaces that have immediately been touched by other people. So you've still got to keep a distance. But clearly, if you're outdoors, then there's going to be an even more dispersed effect in terms of any ability to transmit, if you like, just through the air. So I think that, and also if it's exposed to the external elements, then the virus deteriorates much more quickly than it would do in a more ambient indoor setting. So for all of those reasons, and that is one of the reasons I suspect why the guidance that if we're meeting anybody else is that should happen outdoors. And if you or your family group can meet one other person while socially distancing outside, and I suspect that's the underlying principle for it. So there is still a risk, but a very much reduced risk by being outside and exercising, etc.
Okay, thank you, Richard. And then I think the rest of the questions that we've really had are around policing and things like sort of social distancing. So has anybody got any questions for Richard? No. Okay, Richard, then I think, thank you very much indeed for your contribution. Mike, would you just like to come in with some of the policing challenges that we've had and some of the sort of things around enforcement of social distancing and those sorts of things?
Of course, yes, not a problem. So just a few details up until the easement of restrictions the weekend before last. Obviously, we've had approximately 7 weeks where police nationally and police in North Yorkshire have been involved in enforcement activity around the COVID regulations. And up until the easement of those restrictions, North Yorkshire were ranked third nationally in terms of the number of fixed penalty notices that we had issued, which for us, a force in terms of the number of officers of the size of North Yorkshire, are a lot of fixed penalties issued. However, what we found in North Yorkshire is that we have been uniquely challenged just in terms of the number of people who were travelling for non-essential reasons, especially into some of the beauty spots and the coastal areas, which we've seen throughout regional and national news over the last few weeks. So we've had an awful lot of officers and staff out there engaging with people, explaining what the restrictions were and encouraging them to then return home when that stay-at-home advice was there from the government. Unfortunately, in a minor number of cases, we have had to enforce, and up until the restriction easement, we had issued around 850 fixed penalty notices. And certainly in the last 2 weeks prior to the easement of the restrictions, we were ranked number one nationally in the number of fixed penalty notices issued. What that shows, certainly the residents of North Yorkshire, is that we have been out in numbers as a police force, reassuring the public and stopping and speaking to people and finding out why they have been out of the house. Obviously, since the easement of restrictions, it's fair to say that that level of enforcement for North Yorkshire Police has reduced significantly. There are many more reasonable excuses to be able to leave your house, and therefore we haven't issued as many fixed penalty notices. What I would say, though, is that we are still, unfortunately, in certain circumstances, enforcing the COVID regulations, largely for gatherings of people together from mixed households. But we are obviously still engaging, and certainly did last weekend, with everybody travelling into the community in some of those key pinch points and finding out what they were doing there and the reasons for travelling. And we will continue to do that as we move forward. We need to keep a close eye on the amount of traffic coming into North Yorkshire. We need to keep a close eye on the numbers of people travelling to some of those beauty spots and ensuring that people are sticking to the COVID restrictions that are in place.
Thank you, Mike. So there's a few sort of specifics, really, I think, that people have got concerns about. The first thing is issues around motorbikes in particular. So a number of communities reported large numbers of motorcycles coming and visiting them, and some concerns around the potential spread of the virus, particularly with vulnerable people in some of those communities, and also the sort of rules, if you like, around motorbikes and gatherings. Could you just help us with that a little bit?
Okay, well, the new restrictions allow a reasonable excuse to visit open spaces alone for recreation, to promote your physical or mental well-being. You can visit open spaces with one member of another household, but no more than one. Again, for the purposes of recreation, to promote physical, mental and emotional well-being. And you're allowed to take exercise with one member of another household. So in particular around motorcyclists, I understand the concern of some communities across North Yorkshire in terms of the number of motorcyclists and groups of motorcyclists that we saw coming into and across the county over the weekend. The regulations do not stop people travelling on their motorcycles, but clearly people should not be going out in groups of motorcycles with more than one member of your household. And if there are groups of motorcycles in particular areas, then the expectation is that they follow the government advice in terms of the social distancing of 2 metres. But from a policing point of view, we do not have powers to police those government guidelines around social distancing. We have the powers in terms of people who are gathered together from different households, and we have and we will ensure we engage, explain, encourage, and unfortunately, if we have to, enforce around that. So the advice is around, if people are leaving the house to go somewhere for their mental well-being, for physical exercise, they need to do it alone. They need to do it with only one other member from another household. And if they do go to an area where other people go to, such as motorcyclists will go to particular areas, then they need to ensure that they maintain the social distancing in those areas.
Thank you, Mike. So I think people might be quite surprised that you've got no legal powers to enforce social distancing. So this is very much appealing to people in terms of preventing the spread of the virus and making sure that we act responsibly when we are out and about.
Absolutely. So when the government made the announcement of the easement of the restrictions, they placed quite a lot of emphasis on the common sense of the general public to ensure that they looked after themselves and others when they were moving around. The government eased the restrictions to allow people to move distances around the country if they wanted to move around the country to do the various different activities they wish to do. When people do travel, though, they need to make sure they look after themselves and they follow those social distancing guidelines. But no, the police do not have powers, and we are not policing, unfortunately, people who may appear to be closer than 2 metres. We still are engaging with groups. We have to do that to ensure that people are from the same household if they're in a group, but we aren't there to police a 2 metre distancing.
Okay, thanks. And in comparison to previous weeks, you talked previously just now about the number of tickets that you have issued in the past. How do you see that panning out in the future?
Well, if the virus stays on the decline and the risk goes down in terms of the transmission of the virus, then I expect, obviously, we've got another date of the 1st of June where there may be more restrictions eased and more reasonable excuses to leave your property and your location. So if the public stick to those restrictions, then I would expect that that enforcement would continue to go on a decline. It's unfortunate that we have had to enforce so far. We just ask the public to ensure that they know what they can and can't do when they're out there, and just make sure that they look after themselves and others. But in terms of the enforcement, yes, we have been one of the leading forces nationally for issuing fixed penalty notices, but we will continue to engage with people, and we will continue to be out and about within the communities of North Yorkshire.
Thanks. Does anybody have any further questions of Mike? No. Okay. All right, Mike, that's really helpful. Thank you very much indeed for providing that update. There are a number of specific police questions, but Lisa, if it's okay, I'll address those to you as we move on through the meeting. So it's actually John Foster that we have from the Fire and Rescue Service today. So John, do you want to provide your update, please?
Yeah, I will do. Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. And so really, I just want to give an overview of where we are with North Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service, which largely our overall staffing levels are very healthy. Our sickness levels are down below 3%, which is really good. We managed to keep safe working practices in place throughout. Our availability of our appliances is being very good as well. It's 13% higher than it would normally be around this period of the year. And that's largely due to our on-call colleagues who have either been furloughed or working from home. But one thing we are noticing now is that is changed certainly this week. Not significantly, but it is. So we just need to keep an eye on that one going forward. Working from home continues where possible. And we are now adapting our practices in alignment with the changes that have come from the government with the relaxation of the lockdown, and so we're now able to offer to the business community, particularly, advice on fire risk assessments for the adapted work environment. So as businesses are going back to work, we're now happy, and we are able to advise on those adapted plans and risk assessments. Our overall incident activity is low compared to the same period last year. So this measures from the 1st of April through to the present date. We're about 20% down, just short of 20% down compared to what we were in the same period last year. We've had a few variations in types of calls. So one thing that we are still experiencing is calls to what we class as controlled burning. This is where members of the public may be having bonfires in their own gardens, and they're under controlled circumstances. But it may be that other members of the public fear that these fires can get out of control, or it could be that the smoke from the fires is interfering with other people, other members of the public. And we've received about 50% extra calls to this type of incident over the same period from the 1st of April compared to last year. So I would just urge people, ideally don't have bonfires. If you feel that you need to have bonfires, please be respectful, be very, very careful, but respectful for people surrounding you, the neighbours, road users, etc. because smoke can blow across roads. And we've experienced a number of these types of fires getting out of hand and spreading, and that's not where we need to be. Road traffic collisions are down 70% compared to the same period last year. However, we have experienced this last week, since the relaxation in the lockdown, 100% increase. So we had 8 road traffic collisions which we attended since the 1st of April to the present date. Over the last week, we've had an extra 8. So that's just showing the increase in road usage now, and unfortunately we've had these collisions. And whilst the numbers are fairly low, again, bank holiday weekend coming up, we've already mentioned that there are plenty of people out and about on the roads now, and that's increasing. So, cyclists, pedestrians, motorcycles in particular, over the bank holiday weekend are likely to be increased. Therefore, I would urge the public to be extra careful and vigilant whilst out on the roads. And finally, our fire severity risk rating for North Yorkshire Moors and the Yorkshire Dales National Park remains very high. And, as the people are now tempted to venture out into the countryside for their exercise, please be vigilant. Don't be tempted to light campfires. Don't take disposable barbecues with you. The ground is tinder dry and it will be very, very easy to ignite. Just some general wider work with the North Yorkshire County Council shielded data. This is for the people with underlying health issues, etc. We're now working with North Yorkshire County Council to check on people's well-being by either making telephone calls or paying visits to these houses and providing fire safety advice and safety advice from our partners as well. We're looking towards doing a similar sort of service for City of York should that call come, but at the moment that generally has been covered by local volunteers. Happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thanks, John. Yeah, so I've got a couple. Firstly, you mentioned that your work with businesses around fire risk assessments is now starting again. Can you just remind people how they get in contact with you?
So, yeah, certainly. You can either contact your local fire station, or if you visit our website, there are the details are on the website there. So it's generally both of those opportunities.
Okay, thank you. And just, are there any things of note around the road traffic accidents that you've seen? So I know we've had some really unfortunate incidents with cyclists, but also motorcyclists. Is there anything that you've noted around the type of RTCs that you are seeing?
No, there's no real general pattern that we've identified. There are, speed always tends to be a factor, and so again, we'd urge people to certainly obey the speed limit and don't be tempted to drive faster just because the roads in general are slightly quieter. But no, there's been no real issues there. But again, from a road safety point of view, people need to make sure if they haven't used the vehicles for a while, make sure that they're correctly checked, make sure that tyre pressures, etc., are all in good order. So it's really important that people are very careful on the roads.
Thank you. Okay. And also, I think we did have some incidents of wild camping over the weekend, and presumably, I don't know if those involve fires or not, but just to pick up on your point, that I think is something to be to note.
Yeah, very much so. We don't want people really at all lighting fires out in the open. As I mentioned, the fire risk rating is very high. We've seen around the Yorkshire region that there have been wildfires. Fortunately, we've not had too much in North Yorkshire at the moment, but the conditions are so dry at the moment, people need to be very, very careful and vigilant for that.
Okay, well, thank you for that advice, John, and I hope that people stick with it. So thank you very much. Lisa, I'm now going to turn to you, if it's okay. And can I I'll just start with a few questions that we've had, some of the themes, if that's all right. And one of them follows on quite nicely from what John said around speeding potentially being a factor in some of the road traffic collisions, and we've had quite a lot of feedback from members of the public and local councillors around people speeding. So speeding in York city centre, particularly through the 20-mile-an-hour limits, but also speeding through villages and those sorts of things. So be just interesting to get your view on that. Secondly, there is a specific question around the rules around PPE for police officers and how they engage with the public, and any guidelines that you have on that. So those are some of the things that we've been asked.
No, thank you. And to start with the speeding issue, thank you to those members of the public who have been continuing to use our roads in a safe and sensible way, and also for those who've been calling in and providing information via partners or direct to ourselves about some of those others who have not been using our road network in such a sensible way. It's obviously part of the police role and our partners' role to ensure that we keep people safe on our roads, that we reduce the number of killed and seriously injured. And I would urge people who are taking advantage of our quieter roads to use them as a racetrack, to just stop and think about the devastating impact that that can have both on themselves, their families and other members of the community if they cause serious road traffic collisions as a result of their behaviour and their speeding behaviour. So we have responded to members of the public who have contacted us with that information. We have specialist roads policing officers out who have dealt with speeding motorists, and some of that information has been published out on social media, people driving in excess of 100 miles an hour on our roads and putting others at risk. And they will be stopped and prosecuted for that irresponsible behaviour. So it's a call to people to be sensible and think about the life-changing impact that that speed can have if a collision is caused. We have, of course, got our safety camera vans still out. We use that on a risk and information and intelligence-based approach. So we will also be using opportunities to moderate people's driving behaviour on those key routes where we know that complaints have been made or serious collisions have occurred.
Thank you. Can I just ask you to give us a sort of a bit of an update of normal policing, if you like? So obviously we've been focusing on COVID, but you know, criminals are also starting to get out and about at the minute as well.
Absolutely, and then I'll come on to PPE, which I suppose involves our engagement with the public. So we have an excellent attendance rate here in North Yorkshire, as have some of our colleagues in other forces and services across the country. So a huge thank you to the staff and officers that turn out day in, day out to still deliver a service. And as a result of that attendance rate, we have the capacity as an organisation to go out and deliver that service. And we have found that some of our criminals have found it more difficult to move around during the quieter times. So we've had some excellent enforcement activity in respect of taking some dangerous drugs off our streets during this period. We've tackled motorists and criminal use of our road network, as we've already mentioned. So we are still out there enforcing the law, protecting our communities, tackling criminality day in, day out. In respect of that contact with our public then, I think there was also a question about PPE. So our personal protective equipment that is issued to officers, there's a variety of PPE. So we have a very clear chart and guidance that's been issued across policing nationally that is based on health advice. So in normal circumstances, when no one has symptoms or they're not displaying symptoms or there is no intelligence that there's a risk that COVID exists, our officers and staff can go about their business in their normal police uniform with social distancing measures in place where possible. So you will see officers such as our firearms officers and some of our teams that work in groups where nobody has the symptoms, it's low risk, they will still operate without any PPE, and will still be close to each other and may not be socially distanced in order to do their job effectively. And that is perfectly supported by the health advice. However, if we attend incidents where there are people who are symptomatic, we have personal protective equipment that people are issued with to use wearing face masks and gloves. And when we go to high-risk incidents, so unfortunately the tragedy sometimes where we attend sudden deaths, we have more robust equipment issued to people that they can wear to protect themselves in those circumstances.
And as Chief Constable, are you satisfied that the measures that you've put in around the safety of your officers are adequate?
Absolutely, yes. So there's been lots of research, lots of health advice and testing of kit and equipment, and I'm satisfied that the equipment that is being distributed nationally now out to our staff and officers is kit and equipment that is suitable for use in those circumstances that our officers and staff are finding themselves. And of course, we're still very we're grateful for the fact there's testing available. So where we do have situations where, unfortunately, some members of the public do assault and attack our officers and staff, spitting and coughing on them with COVID symptoms, that we do have the opportunity to test those staff and provide that support.
Thank you very much. So we've got a question here. You might want to come in on this one around holiday homes and whether it's reasonable for people to visit their holiday homes, specifically, I think, for maintenance.
Okay, so I touched upon earlier reasonable excuses. People aren't still allowed to leave their home unless they have a reasonable excuse. You don't just need a reason, you need a reasonable excuse. So what I talked about earlier were reasonable excuses. What isn't a reasonable excuse to leave your home is to go on holiday, and that also includes to visit or stay at home, or stay overnight at a holiday home or a second home. So again, people need to use common sense. That is not a reasonable excuse for leaving your home. If it's to conduct maintenance, if it was, and it depends on the specific circumstances, but if it's urgent maintenance at a holiday home, that may be a reason to attend and fix that particular problem. If it's general maintenance, in my opinion, I would say no, that is not a reasonable excuse because you are visiting your holiday home. It's just really careful just to, does your journey need to be a necessary journey to go and particularly do that thing and leave your house? So I would just ask people just to ask themselves that question before they leave the house for any reason.
Okay, so if your boiler had busted and you've got a flood in your holiday home, then that's clearly something that would need to be dealt with. But if a bit of fencing is blown down and it could be left, then it might not be. That's quite tricky.
It is a tricky one, and people just need to really think twice about these things. But obviously, essential urgent work such as a leak in a property is going to cause significant damage, not just to that property, to potential other properties. So, yeah, common sense approach to it, really.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Lisa, could you just address the issue around speeding in York? Because I think I have had some representations from local councillors there who are concerned about speeding in the city.
Absolutely, yes, and this is something that is very worrying for our residents in the city. And some calls were made when I was on Radio York last week, specifically from residents around the city centre about speeding motorists on 30-mile-an-hour roads. But again, people estimating driving speeds of up to 70 miles an hour on those roads because of the quieter road network. That information has been passed out to our officers and staff so that our specific roads policing units can contact those members of the public and find out specifically when and where that's taking place, so that we can go and exercise some enforcement in those places and work in partnership with some of our road safety partners to make sure that those people are not being put at risk in those communities. So we'll welcome the information being provided to us about those areas where particularly speeding is a problem, so that we can deploy our officers and staff and potentially our safety camera van facilities to those areas to tackle those individuals who are putting others in danger.
Okay, that's really helpful. I think we'll need to provide a formal reply to the Deputy Leader of York City Council on this, because he has written to me. So that's really helpful in the meantime. Thank you very much. I think we have worked our way through the public's question. I just have one final question, really, and that is around domestic abuse. There has been evidence from other countries who've been in lockdown that domestic abuse could increase. What are we seeing in North Yorkshire at the moment? Because this is of interest to quite a few people.
Okay, so yes, absolutely a really important issue, that when people are spending a lot more time at home, potentially in circumstances that were already causing concern and risk to them, that they're now more at risk as a result of being in those environments for longer and not being able to get out, potentially to use facilities or confide in others about the circumstances they find themselves in. So I would urge people that find themselves in that situation to come forward. We can help people confidentially, and there are of course lots of other agencies and services being provided that people can go to for that support and advice. So we've seen a much bigger increase of people contacting our charities and other organisations, Independent Domestic Abuse Service and other agencies about domestic abuse, as opposed to increases in reports to policing. We've seen a slight increase in reports of domestic violence to police. We think it's a hidden problem from a policing perspective, so we're only just starting to see that increase from a police perspective, and we would urge people to come forward so that we can help people. But charities, I know, have seen up to a 50% increase, so it is something that's concerning us very much, and we want to make sure that we can support those people and protect them from harm.
Thank you. So the clear message there that services are open to people who need that support, and of course they can contact people online as well. So IDAS, you mentioned there, have a live chat facility, for example, as well, so people don't necessarily have to go through the police, and there are sort of discreet ways of contacting support services. So thank you for that. So unless there is anything else from anybody else, Simon, I don't think we've had any more questions from the public. Tom, have you got anything you'd like to add? No? Okay, all right, great. So I think that's it. We can call it a day. I'd just like to say thank you to everybody for providing that update. It's really, really helpful, and stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you.